Since March, we've explored the water crisis in the West through a series of events organized by oral historian Jack Leffler. We conclude with a discussion of the Central Arizona Project and how water policy and law is evolving to encompass shifting realities in our region. NMIF producer Megan Kamerick talked with three experts about how water scarcity has the potential to create new collaborations among unlikely groups, and whether the idea of thinking like a watershed makes sense decades after dams and other massive engineering projects disrupted natural processes.
I'm joined today by writer, editor, and historian Dr. Sonia Dickey, and Albuquerque Journal science reporter and writer John Fleck, and Mike Hammond. He's the area manager with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Thank you all for coming on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you for having us.
Sonia, I wanted to start with you. You have written extensively about the Central Arizona Project. Briefly, I know it's a very long and complicated project. Describe what the Central Arizona Project is and why you see it as a model of what not to do in the Southwest in regards to water and energy.
The Central Arizona Project is essentially a series of aqueducts that flow from the Colorado River, I guess downstream, but it's really uphill over the Central Valley of Arizona into Phoenix and Tucson to provide those two cities with water and electrical power. The state of Arizona long wanted a Central Arizona Project, whether it was state funded or federally funded.
This was initiated in the 60s.
Initiated in the 60s, but they had began the idea as early as the 30s, not long after the Colorado River Compact of 1922 was signed, and they had divvied up all the water.
And this was all basically to provide water and electricity
to provide water
to the growing
and electricity.
West, post-war cities of the West.
Exactly. And then the Navajos kind of dropped a bombshell and was like, look, we're not going to do hydroelectric power anymore. We think that's of the past. We're going with coal. And they kind of went behind everybody's back, and because they had been left out of the negotiations primarily, and they signed a deal with Black Mesa Coal, with Peabody Coal to coal mine coal from Black Mesa.
Which goes into now what is the Navajo generating station.
Right. And that is what fuels the Central Arizona Project to this day.
Now we have, a water source, and Phoenix has grown, and Tucson has grown, and other cities. Why is this bad?
Because I think it's bad because of I think there's a two-pronged thing. It basically is taking water from one basin and transferring it to another basin. And environmentally, that's not the way nature's boundaries flow. And that to me is one thing. The other bad thing to me is the environmental and cultural destruction that has happened in the wake of coal mining. And even though it brings jobs to the Navajo Nation, they do get some electrical output, from the Navajo generating station, not as much as you'd think they would, but they do get some. It's a big employer, but the Black Mesa is the heart center of the Navajo and Hopi nations, literally, and it sits squarely in the center of the Colorado Plateau, and there were all these artifacts. They went in and they did archaeological digs. They're still fighting to get like 200-something human remains back from, these archaeological digs that happened in the early 60s. And I think that's the real tragedy of it is the interbasin transfer, which kind of screws everything up, for lack of a better word, environmentally, but also this real sadness to me is the cultural destruction that's happened. And it's not that, in the 60s when this was happening, there were still a lot of Navajos who lived traditionally on the backside of Black Mesa. Hopis were farming, planting corn, beans, and squash, just as their ancestors had done for generations when their tribal councils were signing these leases. And the interesting thing about the coal mining on Black Mesa, too, is it resulted in the largest Indian removal, since the U.S. federal government abandoned that practice in the 19th century, because largely Jack Leffler literally saw a woman's hogan get bulldozed by one of Peabody's drag lines. And that image to me, of these people who had been in this area for a very long time, and then all of a sudden, their world is just gone. you know, and that to me is the human tragedy. That's the, you know.
I read that in your essay in Jack's book. It's very moving. So, John, this is, you know, some time ago. We're probably not going to go undo the Central Arizona Project or Glen Canyon Dam, much as the Monkey Wrench Gang might want to do that. So what lessons do we take from that as we go forward into the brave new world of drought and climate change?
So there's a couple of really important lessons associated with the Central Arizona Project. And one is we understand now, and it's reasonable to argue that they understood then or should have understood, that in the long run there is probably not enough water to fill the canal. So that what you've done in Phoenix and Tucson is built a society based on a sort of false promise of water. And so the question is, what do we do now? Because as you say, we have this. We've now built this, and we've now built Phoenix and Tucson into the communities that they are today, depending on that supply of water. And what you're seeing right now, you know, we're within weeks of Lake Mead, which is the large reservoir that supplies the Central Arizona Project, dropping to the lowest level that it has been since it was filled, back in the first filled when they built Hoover Dam back in the 1930s. So you have sort of fundamentally less water. And one of the things that people in Arizona especially are finally coming to grips with is the fact that they have, the Central Arizona Project managers have started using this phrase structural deficit to describe the shortfall in water that they have. There is less water in the Colorado River than all the people who have come to depend on it. Arizona,
right.
California, Nevada, New Mexico,
pending,
Colorado,
right, for years.
Wyoming.
and Nevada, and Utah for years. And the big reservoirs are emptying as a result of 15 years of drought, but it's 15 years of drought combined with an over-reliance on a supply that really isn't there. So the question is sort of, what do we do now? And that's a really gloomy way of describing the problem, but one of the things that I've found in my reporting, both for the newspaper and also for the book I'm working on, is that when communities come up to the edge of the water supply cliff, what you see over and over again, and I kept looking as I was starting to write the book for the tragedy story. Where's the community that, you know, who's going to run out of water first? How is that going to manifest itself? And what I found over and over again was, when the problems really arise, when people really are forced to take it seriously, communities in the West, both agriculturally and municipal and urban water users, find that they were being enormously profligate with their water, and they use less water. It's kind of a simple thing, and it's kind of a no-brainer in a sense. If you're about to run out of water and you have a choice of abandoning your city or getting rid of your golf courses and lawns, and people do that. And so the question is, how do you sort of manage this transition? And it's a transition we could succeed or fail at making, but the question is, you know, how do you manage the transition? How do you, you know, get from here to there? And one of the really important lessons, and this is really a lesson that I think people learned by mistake in the way the Central Arizona Project developed, is that battling over water, you know, there's the old phrase, the old saw attributed to Mark Twain, which he apparently didn't say, that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. And Twain probably never said it, but more importantly, what the lesson that has been learned, and what you see when you talk to these water managers who are now trying to juggle these problems, is fighting is not an effective solution, because fighting becomes a zero-sum game. California and Arizona, if they fight, one is going to lose all their water and one's going to get all the water. And water managers are learning that instead they need to realize everybody's going to have to use less, and how do we negotiate agreements that manage that, and the really difficult battling agreements. But we're seeing over and over again examples in the last 15 years, as this drought has happened, of people taking steps in that direction instead of fighting.
You know, water managers, Mike, that's where you come in. And as we all know, the Bureau of Reclamation's been sort of the bad guy for years in water in the West, rightly or wrongly. How has it adapted to these changing realities?
We, as an organization, came to the realization that if we were going to serve the communities and the irrigation entities that relied heavily on the resource that was created by our actions throughout the early part of the century, that we had to actually take a look at how we could utilize the resource to begin changing the quality of the environment that had been degraded by the construction of dams and diversion systems that dewatered the river, and also created some interesting changes in terms of the ecological structure of the upper watersheds as well as the rivers that flow down below the dams. And
that's a big shift, right, in mission?
Well, it was a gradual shift. And I came on in the 80s, and I've seen it really shift dramatically here in the last decade, where we've wrestled with the balancing of the ecological needs for the endangered species in particular. And you know, there's some folks that argue that managing for a single species in a system is probably not the most appropriate way to recover the ecological values of the resource. But what it does do is it got that mindset, that shift, that doing these ecological restorative activities was an important part of continuing to be able to do business and provide the power and water that people have become reliant upon.
That means like keeping the water in a watershed to protect like the silvery minnow or another species, and therefore exactly. Protecting the habitat. And
as John was saying about the ideas of you know, coming up against the brink of reality of maybe climate change coming on in the next several decades, you could argue that we may already be seeing the effects of some shift in the climate in the Southwest. This is the 4th year of the drought in New Mexico that we haven't experienced in that successive way in the historical record-keeping period for the water resources. So, you know, folks are starting to look at, and Reclamation in particular believes that we have a responsibility to look farther out than we have traditionally done when managing the water, and preparing ourselves if we are going to have a shift in the amount of snowmelt runoff that we've relied on and designed our projects around, and maybe shifting away from that to more of a monsoonal situation in the Southwest.
To capture the monsoonal rains more effectively.
We better figure out how to restructure our facilities or actually retime and maybe look at the authorities that we currently have, restricting the flexibilities that we have for better managing the array of federal facilities and other state resources together, so that we can be prepared if we do see some significant changes in the snowmelt runoff scenarios.
What kinds of compromises or adjustments do you think will be necessary in New Mexico to adjust to this new reality? You touched on some of these, thinking about where our water comes from, but do you have a sense? We have this idea of like farmers versus cities, environmentalists versus industry. Is that too simplistic? Are there going to be?
I think John's exactly right. People, you know, when we start talking about water and water shortages, people are going to come together. And the best example I can think of is the area down around Magdalena. I cannot remember the.
Oh, they lost their water, right?
Right, but
it was Magdalena,
ranchers, environmentalists, traditionally two very opposing sides came together to fight, for this, and I think we're going to see more of that, where traditional enemies are going to now become friends to fight, and I think that's kind of what you were touching on when, we're going to find ways to kind of sidestep around these water laws that can be constricting and,
Well, John, you are kind of jokingly calling your book the Volvo Desert. It's like the Cadillac Desert Part 2. But I didn't really know the Cadillac Desert was sort of this iconic book, now 30 years old, I think.
30 years old. Yeah.
It's very pessimistic.
Yeah.
You're not. Why aren't you pessimistic?
I have a friend, one of the smartest water people I know, works out in California, who says that Cadillac Desert rendered itself obsolete.
Oh.
By so clearly pointing out the problem, the excesses of the kinds of things that Sonia's talking about, that it made everyone go, wow, that was really dumb.
We won't do that again.
But if you look at what has happened in the years since, we've seen this remarkable evolution toward a recognition that there's now scarcity, and scarcity is a hard problem to deal with, but there are things that can be done in response rather than just abandoning Phoenix. And what happened down in the Delta in March with this pulse flow experiment in the Colorado River Delta of Mexico is a great example of this. So what you have is environmental communities in Mexico, environmentalists in Mexico, and environmentalists in the United States who've been pushing for a long time to get water back into the Colorado River itself, and not simply in the farms of the Mexicali and San Luis valleys. That river channel is just completely dry. So the environmentalists wanted to do that, and farmers and community members down in Mexico wanted to do that too. You had water users.
That's a little surprising.
Water users on the U.S. side of the border who had some problems, and there were some environmentalists and water users who realized, we could work together here, and here's what they did. They negotiated what's a very complicated agreement. It has a lot of moving parts, but one of the key elements is the Mexican irrigation system is very inefficient. But the Mexican government and the Mexican farmers are not as affluent as we are. So what if we, the United States, and specifically U.S. water agencies, go in and spend the money to help make irrigation more efficient in Mexico? That saves water. Some of the water goes to the Mexican farmers so they can grow more crops and be more effective as farmers. Some of the water, the U.S. cities get some of the saved water to meet some of their needs, and some goes to the environment. It's a brilliant solution, and it's an example of the kind of packaging that ultimately is going to be necessary. It's not an Endangered Species Act suit that says the Bureau of Reclamation has to put water in the river and to heck with everyone else. It's not the result of battling. It's a result of people sitting down and figuring out, we have a common interest here, and maybe there's a way to better share this extremely short resource.
Are you seeing this in other places?
You see this in other places. You see there are good examples in California where urban agencies are helping to pay for efficiencies on farms in the Imperial Valley and the Palo Verde Irrigation District. There's a lot of conversation in Colorado about doing similar sorts of things. And there's a growing conversation here in New Mexico. There's an experiment underway in the Lower Rio Grande, the Elephant Butte Irrigation District, and environmental groups down there. And Senator Udall's legislation that Mike talked about earlier has some language that helps set up a framework for a discussion about something like that here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley, where you could have farmers compensated for farming less, so that the farmers are made whole economically, and some of that water could stay in the river.
Mike, there is a kind of a constant chorus of people saying when we talk about these issues, like, well, we just have to stop growth. And put up whatever gates at the border, but we're in one of the weakest economies in the country.
Right.
So is there a way to find this kind of compromise John's talking about when we have these seemingly competing interests?
Well, yes, there is, and I've been party to what they call the Middle Rio Grande Endangered Species Act collaborative program. And it was set up to actually try to strike some balances there. We have, water utilities. The city of Albuquerque is participating. We have 4 pueblos of the Middle Rio Grande pueblos. We have the state of New Mexico and 3 federal agencies participating in the process. And it was designed primarily for the single species management, trying to improve the situation for the Silvery minnow. But we're actually seeing that we need to actually move this to a new level. And part of what the New Mexico drought legislation does is it gives us some additional tools to help us move that program to a new level, where we're actually recalibrating the river to the level of the hydrologic realities that we face, so that we can improve the habitat, make the river a little bit more of a lower plane, so that when we have lower flows, it still behaves similarly. That will be to the benefit of actually two species, possibly 4 now with a couple new listings coming on, and also preserve the bosque that folks have grown to love and enjoy. And so by blending those issues together in a collaborative environment that John speaks of that's going on in the Colorado River, is something that we're working really diligently on to create in the form of a recovery implementation program we're negotiating a new biological opinion for the next decade or so that we will operate the Rio Grande on. So.
Well, I just want to end, a series that you all are speaking or partaking in that Jack Leffler put together is called Thinking Like a Watershed. We seem to have moved past being able to think like a watershed because we've highly engineered so many rivers. Can we still think like a watershed?
Pat Mulroy, who until recently was the head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, Las Vegas Water, makes this great point that what we've done with all this sort of artificial engineering, like Sonia talks about, is by moving water out of the Colorado River Basin to Southern California, to Phoenix and Tucson, and to Albuquerque. I mean, this water is Colorado River water we're drinking, and Denver. That what we've done is essentially created an extremely large artificial watershed, and what she means is not a physical watershed, because we're pumping water uphill and it's crazy, but one of the notions of watershed governance and thinking is that people who share a watershed have to think together about their watershed. And what Mulroy argues is that people from Sacramento and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Phoenix and Tucson and Salt Lake City, we all have to realize that now we're, for better or for worse, we're in this together and figuring out how to share this water resource. So thinking like a watershed becomes this really large and complicated problem. But that's what our 20th century engineering stuck us with, so that's what we have to do now.
That's a very interesting perspective.
Very interesting.
Well, thank you all for talking about this. It's really interesting, very complicated, and kudos to you all for being such experts in it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.